For over 10 years now, my wife has run 2 shelters in Lagos for physically abused women and girls. And so in some senses, I've had a very rather close proximity to some of the stories and some of the experiences of these women. Some of these stories are almost stranger than fiction. There was a woman whose husband burned her with a hot iron from her neck to her lap. So from her neck to her lap was one continuous scar. There was a pregnant woman working as a cleaner in a home who was bitten by her boss and she lost her pregnancy. There was a case I had to refer for prosecution as Attorney General. This was a house help whose female boss had her hair scraped by the security man in her home with a blade. The next day, the girl was reported dead, bruised from severe beating that she allegedly received from her boss, her female boss. The stories are endless. So are the varieties of the barbarities of these assaults. And the stories almost always show that the perpetrators exploit their victims, that usually the victims have poor access to any form of redress, and that the perpetrators almost always escape justice. So the victims suffer a double jeopardy, an oppressive act by someone more powerful, and the state also fails by not giving her justice. All this happens largely because historically very little attention has been paid to gender-based violence. The key then, which is the point of this conference, is how to get everyone, or how to get more people to pay attention, to work together, to create the coalitions and synergies that will effectively deal with the questions and issues around gender-based violence. This attention is important and must never be allowed to wane. By keeping in the limelight all of these issues of abuse, we put ourselves in a much stronger position to fully appreciate and successfully tackle the scourge. It's of course heartwarming to note that every year the world devotes about 16 days from November 25th, the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, to December 10th, Human Rights Day, to advocacy and activism against gender-based violence. In the past few months, several cases of forced or illegal migration have also been reported. Of course, the highest percentage, and some give figures in excess of 70% of trafficked Nigerians are female. The heartbreaking stories of death and injury in harrowing circumstances are rife. But the situation is even more distressing by the realization that the reported or discovered cases are just the tip of the iceberg, just a small sample of the actual number of our girls and women who are perishing in these tragic circumstances. Those who are lucky to escape death find themselves confronted with a fate just as terrible, life as sex slaves, and in the most inhumane conditions imaginable. Here at home, the dangers are just as real, an endless array of instances and scenarios that are nothing short of abusive. The constant flow of underage girls and boys in urban areas who work as domestic helps, and of course we've heard of the baby factories, conscription of children as beggars, the stigmatization of certain classes of women as witches, and of course many know of all of the various spiritual dimensions, usually of course involving women. In fact, if you watch some of the home videos, the witch has to be a woman, you know. It cannot, hardly ever do you find wizards in these stories. The young girls indoctrinated to serve as suicide bombers, the women subjected to rape and other forms of sexual abuse, female genital mutilation, oppressive widowhood practices, etc., etc., etc. The starting point, in my view, for the conversation around abuse is that it can be prevented. While we must ensure that abusers are identified and punished, the greater part of our effort should go into ensuring that we do all in our power to prevent the abuse from happening in the first place by proactively identifying the risk factors and intervening decisively to deal with them before the abuse happens. And when we speak of prevention, victims should not be put on the defensive. All too often, women and girls are advised and counseled on how to prevent or avoid rape, what to wear and what not to wear, where to go and where not to go. But very little emphasis is placed on engaging and counseling men and boys on how to treat women and girls properly. The case for treating women and girls with equality and dignity is a self-evident one. And of course, it really doesn't need much debate. Women account for a significant part of the nation's talent pool. And in fact, many would say above 50% of that talent pool. And so do young people below the age of 18. Nigeria's progress and prosperity, therefore, is of course greatly affected by its ability to safeguard its women and children. We must never become accustomed to condoning the abuse of our most vulnerable people or turning a blind eye to the exploitation of women and children, of women and girls. A number of institutions in our society, social, cultural, and religious, are complicit in the perpetuation of these forms of abuse. Government's share of the burden of responsibility is clear, especially considering that it has the monopoly of law enforcement role regarding gender-based violence. Some of the steps that have been taken so far, especially in the past 3.5 years or so, to address violence against women and children, include the work of the Rule of Law Advisory Team in the Office of the Vice President, collaborating with relevant agencies and non-governmental organizations, working in the area of sexual and gender-based violence, in the enhancement of the reach and access of their protective services to victims. The team has been working in collaboration with the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs to set up national sexual and gender-based violence response teams. And this team, the first team, brings together all relevant ministries and agencies, including the Federal Ministries of Health, Justice, Education, and the Nigeria Police, working closely with states and local governments, as well as with community-based networks and civil society organizations, to address the various aspects of sexual and gender-based violence. The team is responsible also for giving support towards the establishment of gender-based violence response teams across the state. These teams ensure that survivors have swift access, regular access to the right service providers. As a result of the activities of these teams, today we have a better understanding of the coordinated approach that is needed to prevent and effectively respond to gender violence. Nigeria has, in the past 2 years or so, in collaboration with our various partners, set up sexual assault referral centers across the country, from about 3 clinics in 3 states to now coming to nearly 20 clinics in about 12 states and still counting. These sexual assault referral centers ensure the provision of quality forensic, medical, psychological, legal, and aftercare services to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Happily, we now have more states adopting laws and policies and guidelines for holding perpetrators accountable through the rule of law. We're currently working on a uniform set of standard operational guidelines that lay out simple steps for effective response across the country. Research-based evidence shows us already that where the gender gap is greater in terms of economic participation and educational levels, women are more likely to be subjected to violence. This is why we've also tried to invest as much as possible in providing some enhanced educational and economic opportunities specific to women. Economic empowerment is indeed a prevention strategy for gender-based violence. Our GEEP, which is our microcredit loan for small businesses, already almost 60% of that goes to women. and we'll try to focus a lot of our microcredit loans on women who are trading either as petty traders or as small business women. Beyond this, however, we'll continue to interact with service providers and policymakers like yourself to make sure that the legal frameworks are such, especially, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015, are fully enforced and that survivors are supported to easily navigate the legal system. For an effective solution to gender-based violence, I strongly believe that the key sectors must cooperate and synergize their activities. Now, this is absolutely important. We cannot afford to work in silos, as one sector is dependent on the other to effectively carry out its work. For instance, a rape survivor must have immediate access to a clinic that can administer emergency medical care, prevent disease transmission and unintended pregnancies, and offer counseling. The survivors must also have a safe shelter to go to. Those who are victims of continuous violence ought to have an opportunity to stay somewhere else. Survivors who report to law enforcement agencies must have a level of confidence that justice will be served and that their perpetrators will be punished. We've also formed strategic partnerships with relevant stakeholders, local and international, including several of our partners who are here, and whose commitments have proven valuable, extremely valuable, in supporting our efforts to succeed in the war against gender-based violence in Nigeria. Law enforcement is clearly a critical aspect. The need for legal and policy frameworks, and already we have some in place, but enforcement is key. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the National Gender Policy, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, and at the international level, we have international instruments promoting women's human rights, etc. What is needed is the judicial implementation of existing laws, and that involves not just law enforcement, but reporting, ensuring that these cases are reported, ensuring that we follow up on the reports. And there are so many organizations that are today working very hard, not just on calling out perpetrators, but also on following through to ensure that perpetrators are given their just deserts. This requires, of course, the active collaboration of the law enforcement agencies and the judiciary also to ensure that justice is dispensed boldly and decisively. It's my hope that as we continue our deliberations here today and tomorrow, all of the critical issues will be exhaustively considered. I want you to deliberate, especially to look at the role of men and boys in the war against gender-based violence, the role of community and religious leaders as influencers of norms and practices, the role of citizens as effective mediators and the voice of victims in determining intervention, the need for alliances, how to strengthen existing collaboration, how to strengthen existing institutions, and for additional research that will provide us with the evidence that we need for more informed decisions on sexual and gender-based violence at all levels. It's also my hope that the workshop will end with a renewed commitment by all participants and stakeholders to fight against sexual-based violence and the protection of the rights and dignity of all women and girls in our country. Once more, let me commend all our partners, the World Bank, USAID, the British Council, the UN, the UNFPA, WHO, others that have not been mentioned already, Pathfinder International, Save the Children, Women Africa, SOAR Initiative, PINB, the Bellemar Oil, and Air Peace. The last two, Bellemar Oil and Air Peace, as you know, are private businesses that have chosen to identify with GBV causes, and I think they really deserve special commendation. They are one of very few. Recognition and awards will be presented to select champions and organizations and rule of law partners for their selfless service in gender-based violence response, improving access to justice, and their partnerships in prevention efforts. I congratulate in advance all the awardees and commend them all, and I hope that they will continue to advance the cause of justice and oppose gender-based violence wherever it is found. Before I take my seat, let me formally declare open this conference and wish you all extremely fruitful deliberations.